why it's important for those who are the custodians of the court to really understand the court doesn't belong to them. The court belongs to the people. And so they have a responsibility to educate the people as much as they possibly can so the people can respect and trust their decision. Here's the crisis I see. We're losing confidence in law enforcement, we're losing confidence in the judicial system. And that's the worst situation you want to have, when you can't get people to come and testify, not because they're not concerned, but because they don't think that they can be protected by the court and by law enforcement, because they see bad people repeatedly released back to the community. This is a serious issue. So a lot of people run the court system don't understand that these kids now, young kids, middle school, high school age, are exchanging crack and marijuana for Xanaxes and other prescription drugs and mixing them together, and it's all in their state of mind. And it's happening. You see, they need to understand that.
What about this notion, this confidential informant, I guess this culture of, telling people what you know, working with the police officers. What's this all about, confidential informants? What's this all about?
Well, I mean, confidential informants for years, I mean, we've had to use them because a lot of times police aren't allowed into a subculture of violence or drugs or whatever. I think, and of course I'm administrator these days, but I think that the guidelines to be a confidential informant have really tightened up. Maybe George can jump in, because I don't know what the prosecutor's office, I know that crimes of violence will pretty much knock you out. We don't want you.
Okay. Are they paid?
They can be paid. Now, some people just want to do it because they want to help. But confidential informants, see, the confidential informants that this article is talking about, we can't find a CI number on Desmond Clark. We can't find where there's ever been a payment.
So it's that formal.
It's a formal, right?
Bookwork.
Now it's formal. Now, if Desmond Clark, and I'm supposing here, if Desmond Clark at one time called up a police officer he knew and said, "Hey, I'll give you this information. Will you help me?" That's not, in my mind, a confidential informant that we have a book on. That maybe you guys go to court and eventually want to, give them a number, and you guys want to find out their identity to testify in court. We have exhausted our files, and current commanders and former commanders, and those files do not exist. There's no one. Matter of fact, I said it this morning in an interview when I called Sergeant Palmer over at Street Crimes Unit. He laughed. He said, "Well, he's one of our biggest targets. I mean, he's someone we've been trying to get off the streets forever." He said, I'm making my own conclusions from what I'm reading in the paper. If a police officer went into an arraignment proceeding and said, "Listen, he cooperated with me. He's courteous, and Your Honor, if you can give him a decent bond, I'd appreciate it." That to me does not make him a confidential informant. But now that's what the Daily Mail said today. The Daily Mail said that sources close to Clark said that they watched several officers ask for leniency to him. We don't have any proof of that.
And I think that the confusion is based on a misunderstanding, much as Chief Webster described, because there's actually two categories of informants. But what I should point out about the whole issue with confidential informants, it's a very sensitive one, because a person out on the street who's already in trouble and already involved in the system doesn't necessarily have the highest credibility in the first place. And if you offer somebody freedom in exchange for providing valuable information, a person with no information at all to provide would have an incentive to fabricate it. It's a tough situation for the whole court system to be in, because if there's valuable information that is necessary in order to achieve justice in a case, but the only person who might have that information isn't a very reliable person, we're all in a tricky category.
But we still do it.
Yeah.
And here's the problem with it. Now, I know Desmond Clark has been vilified, and he is what he is, and whatever he's done in his life, he's done that. I know him personally. And there's one thing that was very important to him, was his street credibility.
His street credibility?
His street credibility, and Desmond Clark is loyal to his community. So I don't think that he would sell himself to be a confidential informant. He also understands the street, and he knows what can happen to confidential informants. And this whole confidential informant thing, don't think that it doesn't contribute to the violence in the neighborhood and the community, because it creates this suspicion that you're a confidential informant, and you sold this person out, and you sold that person out, and some of these shootings has been associated with that, you see. And there are times when people have been shot that had nothing to do with something, but because someone thought someone was a confidential informant, did that happen. This war on drugs is contributing to the violence in the community about how we're choosing to prosecute the war on drugs. Right. And in the federal system, the confidential informant is a very important part of the war on drugs. These are things that need to be discussed because no one talks about them out loud. But it's the reality of what happens in the neighborhood and in the street.
Chief Webster, what about his point that confidential informants are themselves threatening the peace of a community?
I agree with you, and that's why I think it also goes in line with what George says, that they're a delicate balance. And that's why I think that, and I hope and I pray that our officers, the reliability is important, the credibility is important. You've got to go out there and verify the information, and because you don't want to make up things to put people in jail. You don't want to make up because they have something to gain. And so I agree, and a lot of our shootings are retaliation shootings. And also today when this confidential informant story broke, a couple of our detectives, both black and white, said the same thing you just said. They said that I don't see Desmond being an informant. I just don't see it because of the because how he wants to be perceived in the community. Right. So my advice would be, if the Gazette can get out there and see him, go out and ask him. Go out and I'm being facetious, but go out and ask him. I mean, maybe he'll tell them if he's an informant, because we just don't have any record of it.
And let me add just a footnote to this. The speculation, I think, has been fueled because you have a guy that at least had a pretty lengthy violent arrest record, namely, with the victim, but also had a plea that had resulted in probation and the prosecutor standing silent. And what I've learned, and I think this is a frustration that is going to create more problems in the system, is you have pre-sentence reports that result in a recommendation for probation or not. We don't know what Desmond Clark said in this particular case that was pled and sentenced, I guess, last year. But I've called the court today, the Supreme Court, to verify, and the rules and the statutes say they're confidential. I said, what about the recommendations? Could we not just get that? Because I don't think medical and psychological and all that is something the public needs to know, about somebody that may be sentenced. Well, I'm told there's case law that says even that's confidential. But I think generally, and not just specific to this case, that there are things that, particularly when we don't have jury trials, but the system still is owned and run and should be for the public. Those answers, I mean, really, we should know, because it was an open court proceeding, I'm sure, if he was not a juvenile, is what made the state decide the sentencing to remain silent. There was a reason for that. Right. And so as a public office holder, I probably feel a little strongly about things that I maybe used to think should be confidential or understand the reasoning, and now maybe think that one of the things I'm going to look at is whether or not some of those things by statute or rule should be opened up so the public can glean from that the reasoning of our officials.
Delegate Carrie Webster, I'm going to give you the final word on that. George Castelle, Chief Brent Webster, and Pastor Matthew Watch, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about these issues as we go along. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
If you missed part of this discussion or just want to watch it again, you can go to our website. The address is wvpubcast.org. I'm Beth Vorhees. Good night.
Support for Outlook is